and we can do whatever we want online without consequences. Internet bullying, whatnot, you don't get fined for that. But then you have the real world, you have real suffering, you have the weaknesses. And it's better to kind of shut down and not react to that, but then you have the safety of your home and everything's fine.
Right. And
or so it seems.
The question is, we have all these great networks, we have all these capabilities to connect and find out all kinds of things, and then what do we choose to use these networks for? What kind of connections do we seek out? We don't use this, I mean, it's just a connection. You know, if you think about the technology, it's just a powerful tool, and then it's up to us to figure out what are we going to do with it. You know, what really interests me? And if you look at what's on the internet, what really interests people is celebrity gossip, or my friend gossip, or my, you know, and some of, I don't know if you've had experience, if you have teenagers that you're teaching, and some of the activity there can be really vicious, and even more vicious than face-to-face contact, because there's this safe privacy. People feel even more free to be meaner online than they are in the real world. Okay? And so, and I think you're saying in the real world and the online world, actually we choose to ignore other people's human suffering in both worlds, right? Which says more about us than the technology, right? And you know, and in this one, the difference is in the online world you have the illusion that you know people, right? But in fact you really don't. And I think especially in that kind of mysterious first paragraph, it's kind of like an opening, let's say, preamble to the whole story. You know, he gives you the whole kind of world stage of this happening everywhere to all people, and creating just sort of this looking for an illusion of yourself to present to the world, and where we feel like, oh yeah, I know all about her, I know what she ate for breakfast, I know what her favorite things are, I know where she shops, and yet that's an artificial thing that she's created, knowing that you're going to look at her, and yet you probably don't really know her at all. Just like this man, right, who is here crying, and no one knows him, and no one is listening.
This first paragraph, it starts that we all search for perfection, our perfect stone, the essential attracting element, whether it be a person for social networking connections or something else. But Iris Murdoch said perfection is instant despair. So we have to deal with the weaknesses of everyday love. So this is, I think,
and the online world allows us, again, that illusion of covering up all the weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right? And what's so interesting, too, if you look at this, where am I? 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph. And she's in her safe online world clicking. She counted her friends. I just love that, right? She counted her friends, clicking on their links, wondering about the products which they identified, as if displaying character traits, secrets about themselves, their inner realities, their dreams and longings. Okay, these secrets about themselves, inner realities, dreams and longings. Who has those? I feel like the man at the end, he must have some secrets about himself. He must have some dreams and longings. And whatever that's what's making him cry, right? For whatever reason. Right? And no one will ever know that. Right? And yet online, you know, we're kind of fake displaying, here's my secret, you know, we're announcing. Like, this is my personal secrets and dreams and longings and everything. Okay? But those are so, in a way, kind of tend to be artificial, right? And constructed for other people to look at. So I think students, when we did this in class, it was really a great way to sort of open up some conversations about the role of internet in their lives and the difference between their online life and their real life, and which one was sort of more real. And I don't know if any of you were in Mark Andrews' conversation yesterday here in this room, and he talked about trying to connect our teaching that we do in the class to the things that are really happening in the world and things that students relate to. And this, I think, was a good story for that. It's not, for me, a perfect, brilliant story. I don't know if he's going to win a Pulitzer Prize, but for the purpose of the classroom, this was a really good one. And anybody else have any last comments about this? I don't want to shut anybody out. The interesting thing was for this is that I didn't choose this story. One of my students chose this story. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about what I said earlier about allowing the students to shape the class, how I did this assignment. I've been teaching this literature class for a long time, I would say about 10 years. And I tried to, so it always has sort of the same format. We do a selection of poems, we do a selection of short stories, and we do a longer drama and a novel. And as the years go on, I kind of get bored, and then I try to update them and change around the selection of things, and I see one doesn't really work, and so I throw it away, and I try to find a new one. This year, I don't know how it happened, but I finally got the brilliant idea to let the students choose the stories. So in the short story section, I had, and especially when I saw that some short stories that I personally really loved and was kind of attached to and I had been using for years and seemed to work well 5 years ago, just weren't working anymore. And I had to throw them away even though I liked them. And so when we got to the short story section, I had a selection of like 4 or 5 stories that I had picked and kind of given them to read. And that's sort of that push thing that Lindsay, I think, was talking about in the plenary, where I was pushing these on them. And then I told them in the beginning, and after we finish these, you will go out and find your own short stories and bring them to the class. So, and it turned out, this was the first year that I did it, and it turned out when I read the student evaluations at the end of the course, this was actually the best part of the class for them. And they appreciated that I trusted them to choose a story. And when you're thinking about how to let the students have some control of the class, how to let them set up the assignments. It's tricky in real life. It all sounds great to let the students run things, but then when you actually go and do it, it's kind of hard and a little bit scary, like in this unknown world. So how did I tried to structure it in a way that, first of all, it would be productive, and that I wasn't setting them up to do something they felt unprepared to do. So we had some class discussions on the 4 or 5 stories that I had picked. And so I modeled a lot for them about how to talk about a story and how to have some good questions and establishing really a safe kind of environment in the class where people could feel free to talk about the things they liked or didn't like or admire the characters or, not admire the characters. And there was just room for a lot of subjective disagreement, let's say, and we weren't all trying to find the answer to the question, okay, but rather posing a lot of questions and trying to find something to enjoy and hopefully maybe some little piece of wisdom that we could learn. And so after I had set up that model, I put them in teams of 2, and the assignment was, and the other challenge was, I didn't want them to choose stories which had already a lot of analysis written online, right? Because if you look up Edgar Allan Poe, you can buy or even download for free 7,000 essays that other people have already written of an analysis of Edgar Allan Poe. So I had to get out, I had to go around that like copy-paste danger out there, because I knew all those things were out there. So the way I got around that was I said it must be a short story that has been published within the last 10 years. All right, so it was only very recent and contemporary things. And most of the, and my other guideline for them was pick a story that you actually love, okay? And that this is a slide I had earlier, but I went over it fast. Why love is in the title of this essay. I really believe that we have to love what we teach. And I try to pick poems when I'm pushing and picking for them. I have to pick something that I love. If I love it, maybe they'll love it. But if I don't love it, there's no way that they will love it. So at least to open the possibility, I have to pick something that I love. But then I encourage them to pick something that they love. And I told them, you will, in order to find one story that you really love and that you're willing to share with the class, and then they have to bring it in, so I'll tell you how I did it, but I said, you have to love it. And in order to find one story that you love, you will have to read 5 or maybe even 10, and then throw those away until you get to the one that's really good. So it was also a really good assignment for them to do research, right, online. And we actually had some time in the class to sit down and get into, we have the advantage of having the big, Rochester Institute of Technology is our kind of mothership university, and we're connected with them, so we have access to their library. But even if you don't have access to a university library, there's a lot of stuff, even free databases online that you can search. And so we had, and it's great, I think next time I do it, I'll do even more to get them to think about, okay, how many did you read before you found the one that you liked? What was your search process like? Okay, why did you reject some of these other ones, and how did you find one that you really liked? So it's also a good research opportunity. And then when they find the one that they really love, I had them, we have an electronic course management system so that they could post the link for the other students in the class, and they had a deadline. Everybody has to post their story, and then everybody has time to read it. So when they come to the class, everyone in the class has read it also, and then the students who chose it, their assignment is to lead a little lesson on it and lead a discussion. And the important thing for me was it is not a book report. You know, their assignment was not to present a presentation about this is the book that we read. We know we all read the story too. Their job is to lead an interactive discussion with the class and help the class discuss the story as a group. So it puts them in the role of teacher. It gives them the authority to decide what's a good story, and it puts them in the role of teacher to lead the discussion with their peers. Some of them did a great job with the lesson that they were supposed to teach. Others, not such a great job, but that's okay. You know, the point was to have them to have a little control and to do it sort of themselves. And this is one that one of my students brought. And I told her I was going to bring her story to you today. And this is a student, and she writes some poetry on her own, you know, in her free time and stuff. And so I think it was a very kind of empowering experience for her to know that I was going to pick her story and bring it to you today. But the whole experience for me in allowing the students to pick the stories was really interesting. And I ended up being in the position of this girl, her fear of lack of control, right? Because I like to click my links and have everything set up in my class so that I know exactly what's going on. And I opened up this possibility for the students actually to be in control. And so a very interesting thing happened. So they went out and they picked their stories. And some of the stories, one of the stories, not this one, another one, I thought was incredible. It made me cry, and I'm adding it to my syllabus forever now. Other ones were okay. It turns out they really like science fiction and aliens and things like that. Okay, fine. You know, and it's good for me as the teacher to also deal seriously with, maybe this is not the world's finest quality literature, or maybe I personally don't love it, but if the students found something valuable in it, amen. Okay, we're going to do that. And then at the end of the class, something very interesting happened. One of the stories that one of the teams picked, it turned out to be the most controversial thing to read in the entire class. It was, I would say, it was brilliantly written. I was really amazed with the writing skill and the creativity of the writer. But it was so disturbing. It was a very dark, it had a lot of violence in it, and it had a lot of sex in it in a way that was not sexy. We talked about this in the class. It was a lot of sex, but it was not sexy. It was kind of vulgar, in a brilliant, disturbing, brutal kind of way. And there it is. And I've opened up this opportunity for students to pick their stories. And what am I going to, it was a very interesting moment for me as a teacher. Like, what am I going to do now that they've done this? And so they posted the link, and there I am at home, you know, clicking the links, and okay, well, here's the story that they, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this story now? And it was picked by a team. It was two boys who were not particularly super brilliant students. And I think they were really wondering, what's she going to do, right? It was a really important sort of test of my teaching. They were wondering what I was going to do, and to be honest, I was wondering what I was going to do. And my first instinct was like, oh my God, I know these guys. You know, I know these guys very well, and I wasn't particularly impressed with them as students. And I was like, I can't believe they did this. And they were sort of waiting to see, would I yell at them, or would I throw the story out and not allow them to use it for the class, or what was going to happen, right? And so here I am sitting, and I have 3 days before the class about it, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do about this? And so I decided, I said, okay guys, go ahead. I didn't say anything, just treated them like all the other groups and let them stand up in front of the class and discuss their story. And I'm really glad that I did. And I could see that they were, and when they got in the position of having to teach the story, then all of a sudden they were like a little uncomfortable of how they were going to deal with the sort of controversial and really disturbing content. But they kind of talked around it, actually. They were a little hesitant to even discuss the shocking things in the story that they themselves had picked. Okay, although what they told me is, well, Professor, we were all, before the class, we were all outside in front of the building smoking, and we couldn't stop talking about this story. I said, why can't you talk here in the class? They all had the great discussion outside of the building, smoking on the break, and they were all talking, the whole school was talking about the story, except when we got to the class in front of me, and then they wouldn't say anything, right? But they found something to talk about. And some students in the class really liked it, some students were disturbed by it, and we talked about the fact that literature is not only to be pleasing and pleasant, literature, art, sometimes it's meant to disturb you, right? And that's the purpose of something brutal and shocking, and it's not about liking it or enjoying it, but to actually make you feel uncomfortable. And then finally they said, well, Professor, what do you think of this story? And this is my big test, you know. And I said, well, I found this story disturbing, brutal, and brilliant. I really, really admire, I was just so impressed with the writers. It's called A Wooden Nickel Life, if you're curious and you want to look it up. Okay, I wonder if I can type it up here. If I put escape, if I escape here, maybe I'll just type it up here so that you can see it if I put a new slide up here. So I forget the author's name, but it's called A Wooden Nickel Life. Okay, and it really is, I just admired the writer's skill, okay, even though it really disturbed me. And so then in our discussion, and I ended up putting this on the test at the end of the class, right? At the end of the class, I used this as a big sort of essay question on the test. And on the test I wrote, A Wooden Nickel Life was probably the most controversial story that we read in our class this quarter. Some students loved it, some students hated it. And then I said, you know, for you, what did you appreciate and not appreciate about this story? Did you find delight? Did you find wisdom in the story? Okay, and most of them said they liked it because it was controversial. They liked the shockingness of it. They liked the creativity of it and the sort of radical boundary pushing of it. But they all agreed that it failed the wisdom test. Right, and they said there is no wisdom in this story. This story did not help me in my life or give me a good lesson to learn. Okay, and so they were able to be really kind of honest and reflective about it. And then I asked them another essay question on the test that said, do you think stories like this should be taught as part of a literature class in school? Should people read stories like this? And I wanted to sort of provoke their ideas about censorship and see what they thought about that. And although they all enjoyed it, some of them said, well, I thought this was a great story, but it shouldn't be taught in class, you know, or only for older people. Or some of them said, well, not in the first and second year, but maybe in the third and fourth. Okay, and some of them said, yes, it should be taught, even if you don't like it, because it's important to see what you can do in a story, even if you don't like it. So those were some of the most, I think, like, I really tried to use it as a thought-provoking experience for them. And even the ones who were disturbed by it were able to see kind of some value in it. And even the ones who really liked the shockingness of it were able to see that there was kind of not a lot of wisdom in it. So it ended up being a really good thing. And on the student evaluations, you know, they did say this was the most, finally, like, I actually cared and was interested and talked about a story. So I'm really glad that I did that, to let them bring those stories in, and I'm going to continue doing that. How are we doing for time? Okay, do you want to look at another story? Yes? Okay, the next story is not one from a student. Let's see if I can be really smart and get this to pick up where it did. Okay, so, right, one of the functions of literature is as an individual and collective corrective. This is actually to see our own flaws more clearly and perhaps improve them. Okay, this is not necessarily about A Wooden Nickel Life, but about the Night City one and about the girl, and it was a really good way of getting students to see themselves in the weaknesses of the characters that we were talking about. Okay, and these are actually just some short story resources if you're looking for short stories online that you might use. Exquisite Corpse, I hadn't heard of this until we started doing this assignment. That Night City is from an online publication called Exquisite Corpse, which is free and open. Story Quarterly, the New Yorker, the Atlantic Monthly, and Harper's, those are just some of my personal favorite magazines, and they always have a piece of contemporary fiction in there. Best American Short Stories is an annual edited collection. It comes out every year. You can see my American bias in here of my American sources, but these are just a few of my personal favorites if you're looking for stuff. Story Quarterly is an online sort of professional publication. You can find some of these. All right, I'll let, some people are writing, so I don't want to advance my slide. think we have time to look at one more, and this is one which I picked, actually. It's by Virginia Woolf. Some of you know her, and there I'm not entirely American because she's British. And it's from 1921, and it's also a very short story. And I'll pass it around. It's a little bit longer. It's one, and then the back half. But maybe we can. We'll pass these around. What I can do, we can read this, we have three choices actually. We can read this quietly to ourselves. I can read it out loud. I have an audio clip of it being read out loud by someone else. Do you have any preferences?
Could you read it aloud? Could you read it
You
out
want me to read it?
Please.
Okay, I'll take that as a compliment. That's what my students always say too, actually. I say, would you like to read? They say, no, you read. Okay? All right. Whatever hour you woke, there was a door shutting. From room to room they went, hand in hand, lifting here, opening there, making sure, a ghostly couple. Here we left it, she said, and he added, oh, but here too. It's upstairs, she murmured, and in the garden, he whispered. Quietly, they said, well, we shall wake them. But it wasn't that you woke us. Oh no, they're looking for it. They're drawing the curtain, one might say, and so read on a page or two. Now they found it, one would be certain, stopping the pencil on the margin. And then, tired of reading, one might rise and see for oneself, the house all empty, the doors standing open, only the wood pigeons bubbling with content and the hum of the threshing machine sounding from the farm. What did I come in for? What did I want to find? My hands were empty. Perhaps it's upstairs then. The apples were in the loft. And so down again, the garden still as ever, only the book had slipped into the grass. But they had found it in the drawing room. Not that one could ever see them. The window panes reflected apples, reflected roses. All the leaves were green in the glass. If they moved in the drawing room, the apple only turned its yellow side. Yet, the moment after, if the door was opened, spread about the floor, hung upon the walls, pendant from the ceiling, what? My hands were empty. The shadow of a thrush crossed the carpet. From the deepest wells of silence, the wood pigeon drew its bubble of sound. Safe, safe, safe. The pulse of the house beat softly. The treasure buried, the room, the pulse stopped short. Oh, was that the buried treasure? A moment later, the light had faded. Out in the garden, then? But the trees spun darkness for a wandering beam of sun. So fine, so rare, coolly sunk beneath the surface, the beam I sought always burned behind the glass. Death was the glass. Death was between us, coming to the woman first, hundreds of years ago, leaving the house, sealing all the windows. The rooms were darkened. He left it, left her, went north, went east, saw the stars turned in the southern sky, sought the house, found it dropped beneath the downs. Safe, 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 the pulse of the house beat gladly, the treasure yours. The wind roars up the avenue, trees stoop and bend this way and that. Moonbeams splash and spilled wildly in the rain, but the beam of the lamp falls straight from the window. The candle burns stiff and still. Wandering through the house, opening the windows, whispering not to wake us, the ghostly couple seek their joy. Here we slept, she says, and he adds kisses without number. Waking in the morning, silver between the trees, upstairs in the garden. When summer came, in winter snow time, the doors go shutting far in the distance, gently knocking like the pulse of a heart. Nearer they come, cease at the doorway. The wind falls, the rain slides silver down the glass. Our eyes darken, we hear no steps beside us. We see no lady spread her ghostly cloak. His hands shield the lantern. Look, he breathes, sound asleep. Love upon their lips. Stooping, holding their silver lamp above us, long they look and deeply. Long they pause. The wind drives straightly, the flame stoops slightly. Wild beams of moonlight cross both floor and wall, and meeting stain the faces bent, the faces pondering, the faces that search the sleepers and seek their hidden joy. Safe, 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 the heart of the house beats proudly. softly. Long years, he sighs, again you found me. Here, she murmurs, sleeping, in the garden reading, laughing, rolling apples in the loft. Here we left our treasure. Stooping, their light lifts the lids upon my eyes. Safe, 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 the pulse of the house beats wildly. Waking, I cry, oh, is this your buried treasure? The light in the heart. So when students read this, you know, they're like, what happened? And actually, I give this to them sort of at the end of this is one of the ones I push on them. And some of them, they're like, I think I like it, but I don't really get it, you know? And and I said, you know, and that's okay. And I just want them, I don't, you know, some of you are probably familiar with Virginia Woolf and know a lot about her, but for most of my students, a few of them have heard of her, but they don't really know anything about her. And they're amazed to realize that this was written in 1921 because it seems so ultra-modern, right, in the way that it totally, you don't even know really kind of what happened. And I use this to talk about modernism because Virginia Woolf is sort of the grandmother of modern writing as we know it, and sort of really departing from those strict boundaries of everything has to be linear, everything has to be objective, everything has to sort of add up and make sense. And actually I use this, I talk a little bit about art history also as an example about the whole tradition of art where for a long period of art, a good painting was a painting that looked exactly like the real thing. So your job in the painting was to faithfully reproduce a copy, like a photograph, of the real thing. Here I did it on the canvas, and now I'm a very good painter because this painting looks just exactly like the real thing. And then crazy people came along, like Picasso, and said, like, no, it doesn't have to look like the real thing at all. My purpose here is not to reproduce the exact same thing on the canvas, but not to show you how it looks, but to show you how it feels, or what it means, and then it can look completely different. Right? And so in literature, Virginia Woolf was really part of the same school and really doing sort of the same thing. And she wasn't interested in reproducing in words the way life looks on the outside, but rather the way life feels on the inside. Okay, which is why this is like such a tiny piece, or this to me is like a mosaic, or like actually pointillism, you know, in art style, because it's a bunch of little tiny dots. And if you stand too close to it, it's just like a pointillism painting, because if you stand too close to it, it doesn't look like anything, and you really have to stand back further away until it kind of becomes something. So here, if they're too close looking for what happened, you'll never find it. You have to sort of back up and let this whole thing sort of wash over you with the repeated, especially the repetitions of the phrases and the things, the apples and the pigeons and the ghosts and the what, and yet somehow it does add up, right? It does add up. What did anybody want to say? What it added up to? For you?
The joy of living. And at the end, the light in the heart.
Right. Of course, the ending is important. That's why it's the end. Right? Yeah. Okay. And
what
so
makes us tick?
Okay. Something, you know, and there's a kind of a surprise in the title too, because a haunted house, we usually think of ghosts as sort of being bad or scary, but these are, of course, good ghosts. Right? And it seems that, you know, and as we go on, we figure out here is the woman who's speaking, she lives in the house, and they've lived in the house before her. And somehow all their whole lives, and especially their lives together, is contained and absorbed there in the house, in every room, in every door, in the window, in the garden, that everything is concentrated, their whole existence together, and the love that they obviously had for each other of many years is somehow still there, you know, in the walls of the house. Right? And they left it there for the people who live there now. And that's that moment, you know, at the end where she wakes up and she discovers they left this secret hidden treasure for me, right? The light in the heart. So, other comments about this one? I love the part about the apples and the pigeons and my hands are empty, and it really feels like a poem.
And they're like safe,
Right? The pulse of the house itself is like a heart. Right?
And maybe the buried treasure is actually the light of the heart.
Right, that is the buried treasure. Right? Some kind of joy of living or life, you know, all of this, and that they left it as a gift, right, for these people. Okay? And
And the fact that they are now dead, and they reflect on life and remember the good things, maybe when they were alive, maybe they were focused on the children, on the stress, and all the stuff.
They're such nice dead people. You really like these dead, right?
You're only what? When you die, you remember only the things, good things that you have.
Right, and you know, we have such bad feelings, you know, death, this is also an interesting way of talking actually about death, because we have so many negative associations and fear of death and all of that, and this is such a friendly and wonderful, actually, vision of death as not something to be afraid of at all. And actually in the class, in the poetry section, I picked a lot of poems actually that deal with death, especially there's a Walt Whitman poem, and where death is presented as something not to be afraid of, and something somehow way positive and helping people to overcome the fear of death, right? And that death is not the end of life, right? That death and life are really kind of connected. So this story is just, I give it to the students because I just want to introduce them to something really different, and especially the little art history lesson that I do is really useful for modernism. And they tend to actually like it, even though it's a little unsettling for them and they kind of feel like, what happened? I don't get it. But in the end, a lot of them really do like it. So, does anybody, we have maybe 10 minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions? We're discussing it? Okay, I mean, if you, shall we, I saved 2 little poems for the end, if we had time.
Yeah, waiting for that.
You're waiting for that. I know, because I kind of promised poems and then I went to short stories. Okay, so let's see now. I have 2 quick poems. Let me just escape this. And they're up here. You want Whitman? Okay, let's do Whitman. Did you like it? Okay, shall we do, this is a short Walt Whitman poem, which, can you see this? Okay, so to plus, how can I plus this up?
Control plus.
Control plus.
Couple of times, yeah.
I'm going to plus this up, and maybe we'll see if we can. Is this better? Okay. So here's Walt Whitman. I love Walt Whitman. I do a lot with him. No, this is kind of fuzzy. All right, I'll read it to you. It's short. I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make me sick discussing their duty to God. Not one is dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one kneels to another, nor to his kind that lived thousands of years ago. Not one is responsible or industrious over the whole earth. I had some students who remembered this years after the class, right? Okay, and of course, it's called Animals, but it's not really about animals, right? What's it about? Humans. Us! Okay? And his praise of animals is, of course, how did I get this horrible thing to go away? This thing in the corner. Okay. His praise of animals is really his way of criticizing humans. Okay. What is it exactly about people that he just can't stand? And of course, it's, this is a clever way. No one likes to listen to a complaint, really. And so it's kind of clever that he's disguised his complaint about people as a praise of animals, right? The more I get to know people, the more I love my dog. Have you ever heard that? The better I know people, the more I love my dog. So what are his complaints about humans in here that make animals look so good? Whining. Sweat and whine. Isn't that brilliant? Right?
Crying about yourself.
Yeah. First it starts placid. They are so placid, peaceful, content, self-contained. I am what I am. All right. And if you want, and if you don't know anything about Walt Whitman, this is the thing that he admires so much. I am what I am, and I am satisfied with me. And I would say, why does he, and animals, they are what they are. The pig does not lay awake at night and say, why was I born a pig? I wish I was a horse, this is terrible. He's so sad. Students always like that one, right? He's not jealous of the horse for being, better looking than he is. The pig is a piggy pig and he's happy being a pig, right? And this is what Walt Whitman really feels is like the secret to life. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. That's us, constantly sweating and whining. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. Okay. Feeling guilty. Okay. They do not make me sick. Make me sick is a phrase that really gets my, attention. What's interesting about Whitman is he really is a bridge between a kind of old way of talking and going into modernism. So even in a poem like this, you have some diction and some word choices that are really sort of old-fashioned, and then you have these bursts of modern make me sick right in the middle of it. Okay, but it certainly seems that organized religion is something that really bothers him. Okay. Not one is dissatisfied. We are always dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Right? We are materialistic to the point of insane. Not one kneels to another, nor to his kind that lived thousands of years ago. Okay, if you know Walt, one thing he really hates is hierarchy. Right? And people who are above and people who are below, and our obsession with our place in the hierarchy, okay, and both our weeping and moaning over the people who are higher than us, and yet our need to bow down and worship to those other ones too. Okay, not one. Actually, I think this particular version, it shouldn't be responsible, it's respectable. I'm going to say that this is a mistake, because I've taught this poem so many times that I can tell you this is a mistake. It's actually respectable or industrious over the whole earth. Okay, so what about those words respectable and industrious? What do we usually think about those words?
That are positive.
They're usually very positive words. These are words of praise. Respectable, industrious, right? Vrijedni. Industrious is a really good word, a translation of like vrijedni. Okay? So, these are normally really positive praise words for people. But by the time we get to the end of this poem, these words are not praises. He says, thank God, these animals are not obsessed with being respectable, and they're not obsessed with being industrious and producing things. Okay? They just are. And they're at peace with themselves and everything else around them. Okay? And couldn't we learn a lot, maybe, from them? Anybody want to add anything to this one? Okay. Thank you all for coming. This was fun for me. I hope you enjoyed it.